I appreciate everybody being here tonight for my very first Zoomcast. Tonight, we're going to talk about Write the Book. I'm really excited to have you all here, and hopefully people can get out of something to learn how to write and publish the book of your dreams. I'm your host, Kelly Schols. I became a published author, and it was something beyond my wildest dreams. Never thought ever I would become an author. But one thing I found out is if I can do it, you can do it. And this is a little story of how my book became. Is for those of you that don't know, my wife passed away in 2012 unexpectedly. When she did, a couple years later, some buddies and I were talking about doing a hike. And the hike was a 25-mile hike in the Chuckanut Mountains where I live. And we were going to do it in 25 miles, and there was 7 lakes up there we were going to connect, and we were going to call it Slish, 7 lakes in 7 hours. So we're going to do the 25 miles in 7 hours. As we started talking about doing this hike, people in the community started hearing about it. And as they were hearing about it, they were like, "Are you guys doing this in honor of Heather?" And we're like, "No." Well, the hospital foundation director found out, and she kept asking, "You guys going to do this in honor of Heather?" And we're like, "No, we're just doing the hike." And then finally one day she called me up and she said, "Hey, how would you like to name the cardiac rehabilitation center after your late wife?" And I was like, So I went and talked to my daughters, talked to my friends that we were talking about doing the hike. And we said, "Sure, what do we got to do?" And what we did is I had to make a $100,000 commitment. So I had 5 years to raise $100,000. So how were we going to raise that $100,000? Well, we figured the best way to do it would be to go around to the local service clubs and talk about what we were going to do and ask for money. So we did that. We started going around to the local service clubs, and I owned a plumbing heating service business in our community for 29 years and dealt with a few things, not only dealing with my wife's death, but dealt with some other things in business. And we had a very successful company. And as I was going around to the local service companies talking about my story and asking for money to do this hike, people are like, "You should write a book." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, sure." Well, then, I was involved in best practice groups as well in the plumbing and heating service business all over the country. And I started going around and talking to different groups there as well. And when I was doing that, people would say, "Hey, do you have a book? Do you have a book?" And I was like, no. I had a couple mentors and who became really lifelong friends that were published authors, and they started hitting me up saying, "Hey, you got a great story. You should write a book. You should write a book." So in 2014, I was thinking about it a little bit, and I actually went and interviewed my mom. Because if any of you that read my book, it starts before I was even born. So I went and interviewed my mom, took a bunch of notes, and then just kind of shelved it. Well, as I kept doing more and more speaking and going around the country, everybody's like, "You need to write a book. You need to write a book." And the 2 mentors, they might even be on here, Kenny Chapman and Mark Madison, kept saying, you should write a book. You got a great story. You got a great story. And I just couldn't get anywhere. I had the first part of the book down of what I wanted to do, but after that, I was just stuck. I was like, God, I just couldn't get there. Well, in 2018, the end of 2018, I sold my business and I started doing coaching and consulting. And I had a client in Southern California. So I was talking to him one day and doing some coaching with him, and we were talking about how his 2019 was going to look. And I said, "Well, have you done a planning strategy meeting with your management team?" And he's like, "No." And I'm like, "What? Well, you're a $10 million company and you haven't sat down with your management team and talked about what your 2019 is going to look like?" He's like, "No." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'll come out there and I'll facilitate it for you." So in January of 2019, I went into San Clemente, California, where he's located. And I told him, I said, "I don't want to do it at your office. I want to do it off site." He's like, "Okay." So I showed up there January 24th, 2019. And he goes, "Well, we're going to do it." Karen, his bookkeeper, her dad had a clubhouse. We're going to go there and do it. And I said, "Okay." So we leave San Clemente and we're driving up the Pacific Coast Highway, and pretty soon we start going through Dana Point, and I don't know if anybody knows where San Clemente is, beautiful beach town in southern Orange County. We're driving along, and we're going through Dana Point, and I'm looking at my watch, and I'm like, come on, Mike, we're wasting time. We need to get there. And then we turn, we start going up Laguna Canyon. And as we start going up Laguna Canyon, I get the sensation that comes over me that is just like, oh my God, what is going on? We get to the top of the canyon, we pull into this place, and I get out, and I'm just kind of standing there dazed. And it's a feeling that to this day, it's very hard to explain, but I'm standing there, and Mike comes up to me and he goes, what's wrong? I go, I don't know. He goes, what do you mean you don't know? I go, 29 years ago, I left this canyon. I was a full-blown alcoholic, and I was dead broke. And I said I'd never come back here. I go, that was 29 years and 1 week to the day. And now I'm back here coaching you on what I've learned in those 29 years. Sat down, had the planning strategy meeting. I went home. The next week, I sat down and I started writing. And it took me a month and a half, pen to paper, to write my book. It took that aha moment, that moment of whatever it was, to actually sit down and write my book. Once I finished writing the book, then I got a hold of a couple people, my mentors, and talked to them, and one of them referred me to Jason. So let me tell you a little bit about Jason. After serving in the U.S. Air Force during the first Civil War, Jason Liller put college on hold to help run a local bookstore, thus beginning a 30-year career of book selling, publishing, writing, and editing. Jason was recruited by the legendary Charlie Tremendous Jones and spent almost 20 years helping him run his publishing company, Executive Books. Today, Jason continues his mission to help people get their ideas into print. He worked with New York Times best-selling authors like Ken Blanchett, Bob Burke, Mark Sanborn, and Jim Stovall. And he's turned first draft manuscripts into fully realized books that have sold hundreds of thousands of copies. One was even adopted into a major motion picture. Jason is the author of Write That Book, the no-nonsense guide to writing, publishing, and selling your book, and is an editor or ghostwriter of many more. He and his family live in Pennsylvania in a home stockpiled with caffeine, dog treats, and zillion of books. So, welcome, Jason Liller. How you doing, Jason?
Great, thank you.
Good. So it's great.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's great to see you. So, do you remember the first time I called and talked to you, Jason?
I do, yes. I remember that you told me that you had written, you had a life story that you wanted to tell, that you wanted to share with people, and you had written down sort of a rough biography, and you needed some help finishing that up and getting it out there into the world.
Yeah. And it was pretty rough too, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, but you know what? That's typical for what most people write. Most people are not writers, and sometimes, in fact, often I find that the people who have the most wisdom and the most knowledge to share either are not writers, they don't have the talent to put it across that way, or they don't have the time to do it. You know,
Yeah.
People are running companies, people are entrepreneurs, they're CEOs, they have families to support and mortgages to pay. They don't have time to do that. So that's where somebody like me comes in to help get people across that finish line and to create something that's compelling and successful.
So here's something, Jason. So, you know, as we're prepping for this Zoomcast, and by the way, this is the very first Zoomcast of many that we'll be doing. But as we're prepping for it, we're talking, and part of the Zoomcast that I'm going to be doing is based off of my book. It's called Never Buy the Book Zoomcast, and it's going to be talking about overcoming obstacles. And as you know, and anybody that's read the book, I've overcome quite a few obstacles. But as we were talking about it, you said that, people don't realize that you were not a college graduate.
That's correct.
So tell me about that. I mean, here's a publisher and editor, and I'll tell you, with the miracle work you did with my manuscript, I was for sure you're, English major or something like that. So tell me a little bit about that.
People expect me to have a degree because of the kind of work that I do. Fortunately, the question rarely comes up. But what happened really was that after I got out of the Air Force, I went to college. I attended, but I decided to apply for a job at my local bookstore because I had always wanted to work in a bookstore. They weren't even looking for help, but I applied anyway. They hired me the next day. A month later, I was managing a store, and a year after that, I had the biggest store in the company. And this was a big superstore with a music room and a cafe and everything. When that bookstore went out of business in the 90s, when there was a wave of bookstore closures, I was hired to work at a business publisher. And within a year there, I was running the entire publishing program from top to bottom. And you're right, I never finished school. I put it on hold. It's still on hold. I may get back to it at some point, but I'm doing pretty well for somebody who never graduated from school. And the point of all of this is two things. I know that there's a lot of people, and this has to do with writing. We're not going off topic, who feel like because they never finished school or because they have some other sort of inadequacy, that their story is not worth telling, or that they lack credibility, or that people will not listen to them. That is absolutely not true. And Kelly and I are both object lessons in that. And the other thing is that if you can create that sort of credibility by writing a book. Nobody questions your expertise when there's a published book out there. Nobody's going to ask you where you went to school when you have that. So you can really use it as a tool, which is, I think, part of what you do in collaboration with your business.
Yeah, and I think you really helped me with that too, because even though I sat down and, I did it pen to paper, and it only took me a month and a half, but I mean, I just puked it out. I mean, it was just bleh. Because everything for me had come full circle, and it just flowed. But I still didn't have the confidence to publish it. I still didn't, I don't know if you recall our first phone conversation when I was talking to you. I really didn't know what I wanted to do with it.
Right.
And I'll say you helped me tremendously with that. I mean, to take it from what I had to the finished product was something that was absolutely amazing. And the process of doing it and working with you is absolutely incredible.
Well, thank you. And one thing that you and I did, and which works for a lot of people who want to tell an autobiographical story, is we didn't simply tell your life story. We do that.
Right.
But we also extracted a whole series of life lessons out of your story that readers can apply to their own lives. As I like to say, it's, you went through a lot of difficult periods and hardships, and you learned a lot from that.
Yeah.
But people who read your book can apply the lessons you learned without having to go through all of that.
Yeah.
So in a sense, you did it for them as long as they read the book and as long as they apply the lessons. Now, this is what's important about that. We all are living lives that are filled with challenges and such, but many of us never stop to really think about the challenges that we're dealing with. Every time we come through a challenge and come out the other end and are better for it, we have learned a lesson that we can share with other people. And that's something that may be worth writing a book about, especially someone like you who's gone through a whole series, come from a background where really you should not be successful, and yet here you are, one of the most successful people in the country. That's a story worth telling. There's a lot of lessons there worth learning and worth sharing, and I think that more of us are in a position to do that than we realize.
So tell us about how you work with people like me. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the first person you've worked with.
Nope, I've worked with quite a few, including, like you said, some New York Times bestselling authors and books that have landed on the bestseller list. But there's a lot we can talk about with that on that topic, and we only have we don't have all night. But we did at the beginning of the program run a couple polls, and let's take a look at those and see what the listeners had said. So, why do you want to write a book? What did most people say? And let me see here. I'm not seeing any results. And
there's no results. So if you're listening or if you're on, if you see the poll, go ahead and answer that. We're going to have it up for a minute or so. Here we go. We're getting some
People
answers.
Are voting. Well, I'm going
There
to
we
go
go.
ahead and talk a little bit about it
Okay.
while people answer.
Yeah,
So,
go ahead.
why do you want to write a book? So we have these possibilities. I want to be considered an expert in my field. If you're running a business, if you're a chief CEO, if you're an entrepreneur, if you are in any sort of a situation where knowledge and expertise is important, the book will establish your expertise. In fact, several years ago, I was thinking about writing a book on stereoscopes. Now, if you don't know what a stereoscope is, it's one of these antique devices that lets you see antique photographs in 3 dimensions. And I told a friend about this, and I really want to write this book about stereoscopes, but I don't have any expertise in it. I'm not an expert. I'm just a hobbyist. And my friend said, "Who said you're not an expert?" And I thought to myself, exactly. Who said I'm not an expert? How many stereoscope experts are there? I don't know of any. So I'm a hobbyist. I've got stereoscopes. I've got photographs. Maybe I am an expert. If I wrote that book and published it, guess what would happen the next day? I would be an expert because that book was out there with my name on it. And of course, I would see to it that the information was good. And then if I wanted to go to stereoscope conventions and such, if those exist, I would probably be invited to be a speaker and to appear. So anything like that that you've got going on is something that you can work on. Most of us are a better expert at something than we give ourselves credit for. Think about that. Think about the things that people ask you about. What do people come to you for advice on? What do you spend your time doing? What are your hobbies? What do you think about? What do you read? There's something there that you can probably write a book on. I have a story. Next question. I have a story or message that I can't wait to share. That would often be fiction. It could be anything, but that's where the category where fiction would fall. I believe my story or message will change the world. Kelly, that's you. Lots of people have stories that where they think they've really learned something that needs to be shared with the world that could change the world. A book will help me promote my business. Again, Kelly, you have a business that you're trying to use the book to help promote. A book will help promote your business, and your business will help promote your book. They work together. It's a symbiotic relationship. So if you have a business or if you're in a position of responsibility in a business, the book will help promote that, and the business will help promote the book. If you're a speaker or want to be a speaker, the book will promote your speaking career. The speaking will promote the book. Each one sells the other one. People keep telling me I should write a book about my knowledge or experiences. Again, Kelly, that applied to you. A lot of these apply to you.
A lot of them apply to me, yeah.
Publishing a book will bring me credibility as a speaker, leader, or teacher. We already talked about that. That's true. There's one important thing that I did not put on this list, and my fault. It's shame on me. I should have. And that other reason is because a book will make me fabulously wealthy. Don't ever use that as your reason to write a book. Some of us obviously become fabulously wealthy from writing books, but those people are few and far between. The book itself is unlikely to make you a huge amount of money. Hopefully you make some. But again, as we just discussed, a book can be an important component of an overall wealth building strategy. The book helps promote the business, it helps build the business, and vice versa. So remember to think about it that way. Also, and Kelly, you're going to be doing this, you can use a book to build training programs. You can build a whole seminar series around a single book, so you can get a lot of mileage out of that. So the next line of questions here, my book is currently, keeps flipping around on me. Most people say they have 2 or more ideas that they've been thinking about. And then we have a couple of, like, say that it's a collection of notes or a revised manuscript. So most people are saying it's 2 or more ideas that they've been thinking about. That's encouraging because usually when I speak to new authors, I say, how are you sorting out your ideas? How do you decide which ideas you want to do? And more often than not, I hear, well, I only have one idea. So that's, it's encouraging to see people with more than one idea thinking about more than one thing they want to write about. I would say, probably if you're trying to decide what you want to write about, I want you to think about which one excites you the most, which one keeps you up at night, which one do you find yourself thinking about when you're in the shower, when you're driving down the road. That's probably the one you want to focus on. I also want you to think about a piece of writing advice that most people have heard, even non-writers, and that is that you should, don't worry about what will sell, don't worry about the marketplace, just write what you want. And I think that's pretty good advice. But here's, I think, a better piece of advice, and that is write what you want and what you think will sell. Think about what people might actually pay to read. And, is your novel compelling? Do you have expertise in an area that you think people would be interested in? If one of your ideas focuses on one of those areas, then that's, again, where you probably want to direct yourself. But otherwise, consider the ideas, think about which one gets you fired up the most, because believe me, when you get down into the trenches of writing, you're going to be fired up. Because you'll burn out. You'll say, this is crap. I don't want to do this anymore. Nobody will ever read this. Anybody who's written has been there. And you say, I'm wasting my time. I'm going to do this. I'm going to put it out there and everybody's going to ignore it. Well, I guarantee you they're going to ignore it if you never write it. So you've got to find the thing that excites you, the thing that keeps you going, the thing that keeps you motivated, the thing that keeps you awake at night. And that's what you want to focus on. So if you've got more than one idea swimming around in your head, do a hard evaluation of those and say, look for whichever one it is that really gets you going. The other thing I want to mention is when you are, and I sort of alluded to this a minute ago, if you're writing nonfiction, if you're writing, a sort of a self-improvement book or a business book or something like that, ask yourself what you know, where are your areas of expertise, what have you spent your time doing, and what you think readers will pay to learn, and put those things together. Where that Venn diagram comes together, that's the sweet spot. That's what you want to do. For example, I know somebody who started a lot of businesses and they all failed until finally she started one that succeeded. And after she did that and it became very successful, she went back and said, okay, well, how did I pull this off? And her conclusion was that she pulled it off because she had failed at so many previous businesses. She had learned all the different ways that she had failed, all the things she did wrong, all the lessons she had learned the hard way, and she put those together in a book and put it out there and sold it, and she did very well with it, and she's still doing very well with it. But she accumulated that same, just like you did, all of that information, all of that expertise the hard way.
Well, she overcame obstacles, so you think we can get her on one of my Zoomcasts?
I will see if I can do that. In fact, I know several people. Several people who can come on who overcame obstacles to succeed. A couple other ideas. If you're one popular idea for writing is, autobiography, like you said, that's what you did, but make sure that you've got something compelling, something that readers can take away to improve their own lives like yours, because oftentimes people just want to tell their life story and they don't think about that. And here's the thing, and this is hard to say, but unless you're a celebrity, no one cares about you. No one cares who you are. You have to make them care. Kelly did that by sharing how he succeeded in spite of so many hardships. And chances are you have a story like that too. It could be just something as simple as raising children. If you've raised 2 or 3 children, you probably don't think of yourself as a child rearing expert, but guess what? You've been through it. You've done it. And you probably have your own theories of raising children that you could easily put together in a book and sell to share with other people.
Well, and I will say, Jason, that's something I think you helped me tremendous with, is you helped pull that out of me is what my message was in each chapter of the book, in each part of the book, of each story that I told. You helped pull that out to really let people know that, yeah, he's been through hardship, but here's how he got through it.
Right. And thank you for that. And that's exactly right. And sometimes, and I'm glad you brought that up, because sometimes you really do have to speak to someone else about it. You have to speak to a third party. Say, here's my story. What do you think? And what lessons do you think I've learned that maybe never even occurred to me? Yeah. Somebody else can see those things. Family history is another popular thing. People want to tell the story of their grandparents and the experiences they had going through the war or something like that, the Great Depression, the Civil Rights Movement. Again, if you want to do that, it's great. But if you want someone other than your family and friends to buy that book, you've got to find a compelling angle to it, something to make it really interesting. You might have to add some drama to it. Some people have a real problem with adding fictional elements to a nonfiction book, but you have little choice unless you were there to record everything that person said and everything that person did. This is an example here. This book is called The Other Side of Ordinary. This is a book about the author's mother, who grew up in Nazi Germany, went through World War II, and then lived in post-war Europe. And there's just a whole line of fascinating stories in there. And there are things that people enjoy reading, and we saw to it that it was dramatic enough and interesting enough that it reads like a novel, but it isn't. So if you want to tell family history, ask yourself how you can make it interesting for someone who isn't related to you. It can be a little bit of a challenge, but it's worth doing. So let's see. At this point, I think that...
So did we get both the polls?
I think we did. Yeah, we talked through the 2 polls.
Okay, we got the polls.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
And
So you're going to tell us a little bit about what's going on with interactive class for authors.
yes, that's something that we're going to be starting up soon. We're going to start a video series, Zoom series, just like we're doing now, where we will cover every aspect of writing, editing, and publishing. We're going to cover brainstorming ideas, evaluating your audience, deciding who you're writing for. That's an important aspect. How to structure your book. Oftentimes something that's very challenging for people is how to build a book in the proper sequence in a logical order that makes the most sense, that allows people to get the most out of it. And sometimes it's not obvious. If you think about Star Wars, George Lucas started in the middle. It wasn't obvious. We'll talk about writing, editing. Editing is very important. Most people think when they get done with their first draft, most of the work is done.
No.
You're just getting started. You're just getting started. Yep. Editing is where most of the work is. James Michener said that he was a terrible writer, but he was a great rewriter. All of the hardest work he did was in the editing process. You can take a lousy book and you can make it great. Revision, layout, how to create a professional looking layout that doesn't look amateurish, harder than you think. Elements of good and bad cover design, same thing. The cover is the first thing a reader sees. It's what makes a decision. Exactly, it's a beautiful cover. Kudos to the designer on that one. You know who it is.
That was my daughter.
That's right. I was gonna let you say it.
My youngest daughter did that.
Yep, and I'm glad again that you brought that up. You keep bringing up things that I didn't think of, and I'm glad of it. Anytime, and I'm getting way ahead of us here, but I'm going to say it anyway. Anytime that you want to do a book and you want to design, you want to edit, anything like that, be wary of bringing family members into it, because oftentimes I see people say they're going to have their son illustrate the book, their daughter do the cover design, and it looks terrible. And then what are you going to do? Well, I'm not going to use the cover that my daughter designed. No, you're kind of stuck. So unless your relative really knows what they're doing and has the training, don't do it. In your case, spectacular. She knocked it out.
Well, and I'll back that up is bringing family into it. You know, in my case, it was very touchy and sticky situation. You know that, and you helped me and my daughters get through that with your edits and public, you know, your edits and just your help there. But, you know, because I talk a lot in the book about my wife passing and the relationship between her and I and the family, that was a very sticky situation with my daughters.
Right.
So, you know, it took us 10 months to get through the editing process, then get it published. And 2 months of that was probably the relationship with me and my daughters and getting through that.
Right. You got to get just right.
And if I wouldn't have had you to do that, I don't think I ever would have got through that process.
Well, again, it helps to have somebody else out there to push things a little bit and hopefully smooth things over a little bit. And you took the right path there. Oftentimes when authors get into a situation like that, they'll get frustrated and they'll just say, hey, you know what? This is my book. I'm going to do it the way I want. And if you don't like it, write your own book. So, but you know,
and then
out of that. And so you did the right thing, I think, to be sensitive, tell the important parts that are relevant to the larger story that you're telling, which that's all in there. And then everybody's happy in the end, I hope.
Well, and I did that at first. I dug my heels in. I was like, you know what, girls, if you don't like it, don't read it. But after talking to you and you helping massage through it and stuff, it really helped me to look at it from their point of view and go, okay, I can have the message come across, but yet still protect their hearts, which was the ultimate goal.
Right. And that's the thing. The message still gets across. Everything that's important is still there. And that's all part of editing. You know, looking at what has to stay, what can go, how do we streamline? How do we keep the readers engaged, get the message across, and hopefully keep everybody happy? And I think we checked every box on that. So I'm really thrilled that it came out the way that it did. We'll also cover in that series common errors and misconceptions. There's a lot of them. The heartbreak of writer's block, how to get through that, what causes that to happen. Professional standards, how to come across as a professional published author, not a self-published amateur. Legal issues, how to keep yourself out of trouble. Copyright issues. How to deal with the Library of Congress, various publishing options that are open to you, and what to do after you finish the book. And the answer to that question is start the next one. Always have in mind what your next project is, so that you don't stop and spin your wheels. You got to keep things rolling. So that's what we have planned. And if you're interested in that, please, in the comments, in the chat box, say that you'd be interested in the writing program, and we'll be in touch with you. That will should be launching soon. And we'll have a study program coordinated with that, so it'll be a whole thing, and it will be a lot of fun, and it'll be interactive. And when we come out the other end of it, I think that we'll have a lot of people who are really in a good position with books that they're working on. So,
Perfect.
and then Kelly, you've got your own program series coming up.
I do. And before we get to the question and answers, and we'll get to that in a minute, and I see we already have one question. Before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about that. This is my very first Zoomcast, but I'm going to have more. And like I said at the beginning, it's going to be about overcoming obstacles to build a life of wealth and fulfillment. And, it's based off the book. And when I say build a life of wealth and fulfillment, it doesn't mean money. It could be anything from, a great family life to, maybe a great single life, traveling the world, whatever it is. But I'm going to have people on that have been through tragedy, heartache, addiction, just anything and everything. And it's going to be males, females. I already have a lineup. I've already talked to quite a few people. I have the one set up for next month. And next month, it's going to be a friend of mine that we actually went to high school together. We didn't hang out a lot in high school, but after high school, we did start hanging out. And when I talk about me leaving Southern California, dead broken, a full-blown alcoholic, Jeff was right there with me. I moved back to Washington in January of 1990. He followed me back up here. I sobered up that year. He sobered up the following year. He became a pastor. So, I went from alcoholic to business person. He went from alcoholic to pastor. So I'm going to have him on, and we're going to talk about that and the path that he took through his recovery. And, him and I have talked a lot over the last 29, 30 years about our recoveries and about what we do. And he helps a lot of people. So it should be a really good Zoomcast. So we'll be sending stuff out to people that are interested in it. We'll be emailing everybody to let them know. And then we're going to continue once a month. I'll be doing one with people, like I say, that have overcome different obstacles and heartaches and different things once a month. So let's get to the question and answers. We do have one here. I don't know if you can see it, Jason.
I can see it.
Okay.
Kendra asks, how do you keep yourself working towards a completed final manuscript without getting hung up on reworking or sprucing up what you've already written so it becomes a more cohesive, complete story in the end? Or how do you strategize balancing between working towards a complete story as well as filling in the gaps and fleshing out the details? That's a great question. And
And
this is a problem that really has come up a lot lately. Since word processors have come on the scene. If you used to write back in the days of typewriters, it was less of a problem because you didn't have the luxury of constantly editing yourself. And that's, I think, what the question really here is about. The way that you do that is you have to discipline yourself to keep moving forward and getting a first draft on paper. Don't get hung up on what you've already done. Don't constantly hit reverse and go back and revise and polish and read over things and fix it and rework it. Keep going toward the finish line. Your first draft, unless you're a genius, and most of us aren't, is probably going to be terrible. And that's okay, because you don't have anything to work with until you have something to work with. And you don't have something to work with until you finish that first draft. So no matter how tempting it may be, no matter how much it's constantly nagging at you that what you've written you think isn't very good, you have to just keep plowing forward. When you get to the end, then you're going to take it out and you're going to start right over again at the beginning and start fleshing everything out, improving it, making it better, doing all the things that you wanted to do. And here's another benefit to that. Get all the way to the end. So now the stuff that was all the way back at the beginning, you probably wrote a couple months ago. And that means you're going to go back and you're going to read it with fresh eyes. And you're going to say one of two things. Either you're going to say, wow, this is great. Or you're going to say, what was I thinking? This is awful. So probably it's going to be the latter. you're going to read it and say, this is just terrible, you know, but because you have all of that down on paper now, you can go through and start making it the great book that you want to be. You've got all the bones there. So now you're going to go through and you're going to hang all of the flesh on the bones, all the garland on the tree to be less morbid. And you're going to start to see all of that take shape. Another thing, and this is tangentially related, if you find yourself getting a little bit bogged down somewhere in the manuscript and you just really can't go on, the last thing you want to do is stop. If you take a very long break, you're before you know it, you're not writing a book anymore. That book is gone and you're doing other things. So if you really find yourself stuck, try going to a part of the book that excites you, that you're thinking about, especially if it's a novel. If it's a novel, there's probably a few scenes in that book that you love and you can't wait to get to, but you got to trudge through all the other stuff to get to those scenes. So if you find yourself getting bogged down, go write one of those scenes. Write it out of order. You don't have to write it in order. And then once you've got that, it's going to fire you up. You're going to be excited again, and you're going to go back and you're going to write the stuff that doesn't excite you as much to fill in the gaps in between.
Well, and working with you, I think you kind of did that with mine. You didn't edit it per chapter. I mean, you were throwing me chapters. It was like, wait a minute, that's not the second or third chapter.
Right. Yeah. Don't assume that it has to be a linear process. It doesn't have to be. I think that, at least starting, that's probably the best way to approach it. But again, don't let it be too much of a challenge. Don't let it be a roadblock. Don't let it stop you. Because stopping can be fatal. You don't want to take too long a break. You got to keep plowing through it. You got to force yourself to do it even when you don't feel like it, or you will never, ever finish it. So let's see. Go ahead.
There's another question, but let me say something else. If you do end up working with Jason, I can tell you, like I said earlier, if I can publish a book, anybody can. I barely graduated high school. I had to negotiate my way out of high school. As a matter of fact, English was not one of my top priorities and top subjects. And when I write, not only do I have very sloppy, but I don't spell things very well. And Jason did a phenomenal job of transcribing that into a masterpiece. So,
yeah, I think we caught all the mistakes, and that in itself is tough. The typos get through. Yeah. But I think we found all of them. So and that's but that also comes with multiple sets of eyes, lots of people looking for things and finding things. So that's a team effort, and I appreciate that. So Kendra, I hope that answers your question. Let me know if you want me to elaborate on anything. Just type it right in there, or if you think that I missed the direction you were going with that. But otherwise, are there any other questions about it?
Yes, we do have another question from Kenny.
I don't see it. Oh, go ahead.
I have it. It's from Kenny. Okay. So Jason, in your experience, how much of writing a book is actually therapeutic for the author? And is this fairly common results?
It can be, yes. When you're writing a book like you've written, things come out, you feel things, you relive things that in some make you cope with it. It's like going to visit a therapist, because it causes you to have to think through it. Because not only are you remembering it, you're having to really think it through. You're having to think about the sequence of events, what it meant to you, what it meant to other people, what it means to you now looking back on it, and what it might mean to you years from now, and how different your life might be if it had never happened. So there's all these different facets that you are forced to confront and think about and deal with. I know somebody who really wanted to write a book about his experience in the Vietnam War. And he just felt it was very necessary to get this message out, or to share what he did. But it was torture for him to write it, because every time he did it, he relived everything that happened to him. But there were many times he said to me, I just don't want to continue with this. It's too hard. It's too painful. It's tearing me apart inside. And I believe that it really did when he was writing it. But when he was done, he said, you know what? I really needed to do that. It was necessary. I'm so much more at peace with everything now. I thought about things that I haven't thought of in years, and everything just makes a great deal more sense to me. And I think that he's a lot more centered and a lot more at peace with what had happened. And if he hadn't written that book, he would still be, I think, under a great deal more anguish probably for the rest of his life, because he wasn't coping with the things that were bothering him. So the book was
And I can say from my own experience of doing it, it was majorly therapeutic for me. I mean, I wrote a lot of the book on an airplane when I was traveling, and I would be sitting there writing the book literally in tears.
Mm-hmm.
And people looking at me like, what's this guy doing?
Yeah. Well, I know a few times we talked on the phone, I could tell that you were getting emotional
Yeah.
discussing it. And it's an emotional story.
Yeah.
I hope it helped you. And I think that it helps other people when they read it. And that's the other thing to
Yeah.
remember. You are helping other people. So it becomes bigger than you. It's a
And
legacy that you're putting out there.
And that was a hard thing for me to really understand that. And that's part of, Kenny and Mark talking me into writing the book and realizing that it is bigger than me.
Right, right.
And the amount of people that I've seen that it has helped already is just phenomenal. And if I can help more people, that's what it's about.
I'm really happy to hear that. That's what really makes it all
Yeah.
worthwhile, is when you see the effect it has on other people.
Yeah.
And just before we leave this topic, because there is another question here.
Yeah.
One of the benefits of being a published author, having your book out in paper, is that 100 years from now, somebody is going to pull your book off the shelf and read it, and it's going to change their life. 100 years from now, long after we're all gone, your book will still be out there doing its work. That's powerful.
Very powerful.
There's very few things you can do where you're going to have that kind of a long-lasting effect.
Yeah. Do you see the next question there?
I do. This is from Kenny. Question is, when do you call the ball and decide good enough is good enough and it's time to go to press? Seems like you can get stuck in, it can still be better. Yes. I know several authors who are never ready to pull the trigger. They can always make it better. They can always improve it. They keep second guessing themselves. That's a very real phenomenon. And here's the hard part about that, is that, yes, it can always be better. You can always make an improvement. Mark Twain could go back to Huckleberry Finn and fix it. He can make it better than it is now. But you know what? It's Huckleberry Finn. It's a classic. It's as good as it needed to be. The question is, when is it as good as it needs to be? That's difficult to say. How much time have you spent on it? If it's been a couple years, it might be time to stop. Give it out to some people and say, hey, what do you think? And we call these people beta readers, and it's not a bad idea to get some people to read your book before you publish it. Don't send it to too many, because then you've got too many cooks spoiling the pot. Everybody's going to come back to you with advice, and you're going to say, oh, I got to fix all these things. No, you don't. You have to self-edit and say, okay, this piece of advice is good. That was not. I'm not going with this. I'm going to trust my gut on this part. But you're going to come to a consensus. And when you do that, instead of getting in a big discussion, when you send your book out to beta readers, to preliminary readers, have a short list of questions. And the most important one is going to be, is this book accomplishing what I want it to accomplish? And only you, the author, knows that. What do you want the book to accomplish? So you're going to quiz the readers and say, what did you get out of it? Did you get this out of it? Did you get that out of it? And if their answers satisfy you, then your book is probably ready for press. Is it good as it can possibly be? No, it never will be as good as it could possibly be. It could always be better. But if you want the book out there, and if you want to move on to the next project, at some point you've got to draw a line and say, that's it. And here's the next thing. And this doesn't work so well with fiction, but with nonfiction, like with your book, if the book is successful in a couple years, you can always come out with a revised edition, a second edition. You can put more material in it. You can go back and fix things that you didn't fix the last time. So you always have that option to go back and put out another version. So we have another question. This is from Angela. Her question is, for capturing my book, do you recommend any specific program that I can enter it into to set it up for easy transfer into the final product? Yes. And it isn't necessarily the most popular. People will roll their eyes, especially if you're Apple people, but Microsoft Word is the best thing to use. I'm not saying that it's the best word processor. A lot of people like to use one called Scrivener, which is neat. It's interesting. But the problem is, well, let's not do it that way. The benefit of Microsoft Word is that it is the industry standard. It's what people expect you to use. It's what professionals like me, like layout designers, like publishers expect you to use. So when you write your book in Microsoft Word, send it out to an editor, send it out to a layout artist. They are fully equipped to do it. If you use something like Scrivener, if you use WordPerfect, which is still popular in the legal profession, they're going to likely to come back to you and say, hey, put it in Word so that I can work with it more easily. So you may as well just start with Word. The biggest problem I have with Word is that if your manuscript gets really long, it will sometimes get kind of slow down and get hiccupy. So the solution to that, if you're writing a novel that's, 80,000 words, put each chapter in a separate file. Each chapter is in a separate file. That way the thing does not get too large and unwieldy. I really recommend everybody do that. And then at the end, you shove it all together. But yes, so the answer to the question after all of that digression is Microsoft Word is what I recommend. It's certainly going to make it the easiest for the people you work with to work with your manuscript when that time comes.
Well, and even with my small book, we ended up doing that, making each chapter different.
Yes. It makes it so much easier to edit when you do that.
A lot. Once you did that and you sent it back, it was so much easier to work together on that.
It just gets unwieldy when everything's together. Save that for the end.
Yeah.
Next question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, another question. Go ahead.
Okay. This is from Kendra. Your previous answer definitely helped me. This was the question about getting hung up on reworking things as you're working. I've been slowly working on a dystopian sci-fi fantasy book about a realistic twist for a couple years now. With a realistic twist, I'm sorry, for a couple years now. But as you've somewhat hinted towards, I've stopped several times from exhaustion or getting busy with life or writer's block. I've found it difficult to get myself to go back to the Word document and keep going. Part of it is not knowing how to ultimately wrap it up in an ending, and another part is not knowing how to incorporate all the ideas I have without it looking like vomit. Suggestions? I know about vomit. This is okay. First of all,
this was vomit.
I wouldn't go that far. No, it wasn't that bad. You're being too hard on yourself. But here's what I think of that. First of all, if you're working on sci-fi fantasy, it's okay to have more vomit because you're doing world building. You have to. I assume you're creating a world that doesn't exist. You have to build it from the ground up. It's like Hogwarts in the Harry Potter books. So you're allowed to get a little more elaborate with your descriptions and such. But the one thing that worries me in your question is you don't know how you're wrapping it up. If you want to write fiction, I really suggest that you start with the end in mind. If you don't, you're going to risk having everything just fly off into chaos like spaghetti. You need to stop. Ask yourself where it's going. Look at the relationships of the characters. Say, how are they going to come together in a satisfying fashion in the end? How are all the parts going to come together? I don't know if you watched Game of Thrones. I didn't read the book, so I'm not talking about the books. And I know that the books have not had an ending because the author hasn't written the last 2 books. And at this point, I don't think he's going to be perfectly honest with you. But the TV series was fantastic. Lots of stuff going on, zillions of characters, and you had the sense of a guiding hand over everything. And the reason why is because they knew that the end had already been written. When they got to the end, they kind of botched it. But still, they knew where everything was going, and you could feel that throughout the whole series. If you know where your book is ending, if you know how everything wraps up, then your book will have that same strong sense of authorial control and direction. So I think that you really need to stop, look at what you've written, and come up with an ending, and then start working towards that ending. Let's see. How to incorporate all the ideas I have without it looking like word vomit. Well, again, this is science fiction and fantasy. One thing that you can do is when you get your story into a section that is where they're moving into a new location or where some new phenomenon is taking effect, stop and talk about that. They've gone to a new planet or a new land, so you're going to put the brakes on and you're going to describe this land and the rules of it and what the society is like and all of that. And then you're going to go back to what your characters are doing there. Lastly, and I certainly understand, grinding down because of exhaustion or the busyness of life. That's when it's important that you keep writing no matter what. I don't care if you're just writing a couple paragraphs a day. You've got to keep the momentum going. If you stop, the book will never be finished. And that would be a real tragedy after 2 years. Don't let that happen. Okay. Keep writing. And if you feel like you're getting blocked, here's, again, oftentimes the biggest problem with writer's block, especially in fiction, is structure. Your book needs a different structure. Look at how you've arranged everything, the sequence, and ask yourself if maybe you need to flip it around. Some books don't start at the beginning. They start in the middle. You have, the book starts with an exciting battle, and then at the end of the battle, you're going to rewind and show everything that happened before the battle leading up to it. So ask yourself if maybe that would help you get things rolling again. But really, I think based on the question I have here, the most important thing for you to look at is the ending and figure out how you're going to wrap it up.
Well, and I from from my point of view is, there was points where I would get way ahead in my story. And as I was writing, I'd go, oh, I forgot this. And I'd go back. And then once I got you involved, you brought more of that out in me by asking certain questions.
Right. And that's another reason why it's good to get a third party person involved, because they will find the holes that you missed.
Yeah.
And they will also find the things you put in that maybe don't belong.
Yes.
And as the author, we're too close to it. We don't see those things.
Yeah.
A third party person will see it immediately.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So Angela had another question, and then I have another one from David.
Okay. Angela's question is, when I quote someone, is it enough to reference them and the publication or event it's from, or do I need to get permission? And is public domain truly legal for us to quote without getting in trouble? Okay, one of the things I said we would be talking about in the series when we do it is legal issues. And absolutely, if you're quoting someone, if it's from a speech or something, there's no issue there. You can quote them. You do want to cite them. Obviously, you don't want to say it was your work. So from speeches, from interviews, you can do that. The way interviews work is if you arrange an interview with someone, it is understood that you are doing it for publication. So that's generally okay. Although it's always a good idea to get somebody to sign a simple document saying that it may be published and they give their permission.
So you'll be talking about that in the series that
that'll be covered. That'll be covered.
Okay.
But the short thing is, what you don't want to do is quote too much out of a book. A line or two is fine. More than that could get you in trouble, regardless of whether or not you cite it. Public domain is truly legal. Anything published from 1923 backwards is ironclad public domain. Nobody owns it. Nobody can come after you. You can do whatever you want with it. Don't worry about that. You can take the whole book and reprint it. You're free and clear. Just make sure it's published 1923 or earlier. Later than that, no, you don't want to do that. And make sure you know what you're talking about. You can check with me. I know these rules.
I got a question here from David. Once you have the book written, what are some successful methods for marketing it?
Successful methods for marketing it are to build a social network ahead of time. If you're self-publishing it, which is what most people that are on the line tonight are probably going to be doing, at least to start with, you need to build some groundswell of interest in it. So start on social media, keep building some, start with the people you already know, and then start building out from there, because what you need is an audience that's following what you're doing. Say, hey, I'm writing a book and this is what I'm doing. People love to watch people work. People love to hear about the work that people are doing. So, say I'm writing a book, this is what I'm doing. I've just started this chapter. I'm really struggling with it. This chapter is fantastic. It's just zipping right along. Come up with cover art, 4 different versions of cover art, and say, we're thinking about these 4 covers. Which one do you out there on Facebook think I should use? People love to get involved, and it gets them more invested in it. That's the first thing you want to do. Start looking at your local media, the radio and the television, because a lot of them have programs that you can be on absolutely free to talk about your book. It's an easy way to get your message out there to the public. And also when you're done, you usually have a recording that you can use in other ways. Check with other local organizations. Always start local. But when you get into the media, like the television stations and the radio stations that I mentioned, always ask them, where else can I go? Because they know other people. What other cities do you know where I could take this? And if you start to build some momentum, then you can start to think about doing something like hiring some sort of PR. Don't do that early, because most PR, I find people are wasting money. You need to have a little bit of momentum. You got to have something to talk about. Do events, go to bookstores and offer to do book signings. Go to places that are not what you would expect. For example, I know people who write books about dogs. They go to the bookstores, they do the dog signings. They also go to pet stores. They go to dog rescues and do book signings there. They do much better there. And if you're doing something off-site, like at a dog rescue or something that's out of the box like that, try to find a way to tie it in with a charity. Here's why. If you tie something in with a charity and you say you're giving part of your proceeds to a charitable organization, now you've got news, and the newspapers will come out and cover it, and the TV stations will come out and cover it, because it's a charitable event. It's not just about you. It's bigger than you. So always be thinking about how you can do that. But yeah, you've got to start local. You've got to start early. Don't wait until your book is ready to be published. Start now. Start when you're thinking about it, because it takes time to build all of this, and you don't want to be starting when your book is ready to hit the marketplace.
Well, and how about that?
That's exactly right. Put Kelly Schols to work for you. That is in the back of Kelly's book. So when people read his book, they know exactly how to get a hold of him. They know exactly how to hire him. So if you're writing a book that falls into that kind of category, where it's a self-help book, a business book, a management book, make sure that everybody who picks up a copy of that book knows how to get a hold of you, because they will be hiring you. Don't neglect that. I've seen people do that. Big mistake.
Well, and something I was told before I even published this from Mark was, this is my business card now.
Right.
Everywhere I go, I have these. I've given away over 200 of them. Given them away.
And every one of those is an advertisement for you.
Yeah.
And you know what now when somebody gives you a business card, a traditional business card, what do you usually do with it?
Me?
Yeah.
Snap a picture of it and throw it away.
Okay, but you threw it away.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's usually what happens to business cards.
Yeah.
How many people do you think are throwing away your book?
Everybody that I've talked to, that I've given them to, says they've read it and given it to a relative or friend.
Exactly. They don't throw it away.
Yeah.
So there's a great deal of value there. And even though, it's your cost per unit is certainly higher than a business card, you're going to get a lot more mileage out of it than you would out of your traditional business card.
Even when I travel, I take them with me. I've given them out at the airport. I've given them out on airplanes, just, drumming up conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a conversation starter. That's right. If you do a lot of travel and you have that book, guess what? You've got something to talk about for the rest of the trip.
Yeah.
Yeah. That flight to Singapore is going to be busy now.
Another question here. In most self-published books, I see a very few illustrations or graphics. Are graphics expensive to publish?
They are not expensive to publish. If by publishing you mean printing, no. Well, unless they're in color, then you're talking about something different, because color printing does cost more. Just be glad that's 2020, because 20 years ago it was way more expensive. Now, not so bad. But no, if it's black and white, if it's monochrome, it does not cost any more. But the other side of that might be that you have to pay something to produce the illustrations or the graphics. Illustrators, for example, if you're writing a children's book, something like this, you have to hire an illustrator. That costs money, unless you know somebody who is really good at it. Again, be careful hiring relatives. You could be digging a hole for yourself. Same thing with graphs. You might have to have them professionally produced. That costs money. But as far as printing, no, it doesn't cost any more than a black and white page of text.
Awesome. Okay, we're about done here, Jason. We're going to get cut off with Zoom here. So
Yep. Last thing I've got here from Rebecca: how do people hire you? How do you charge? Rebecca, I'll get in touch with you afterward to cover that. But yeah, I've got everybody's information here. We'll be in touch. So anybody who wants to talk about that, we'll do that, offline, just between us, rather than here in the middle of a Zoom call when everybody else is listening in. And we've got one more thing here, and then Kelly's right. We got to cut it off. Kelly gave a copy of his book to me. I'm enjoying it and looking forward to sending it to a rehab center to inspire students. Kelly sets an amazing example of a tremendous work ethic. His story gives hope to those who are unemployable due to their record, who can become entrepreneurs like he is. Absolutely. That's absolutely right. And that's what it's about. Yep. Totally. Yep. That's what it's about. So I want to thank everyone for being on here. Keep an eye out for Jason, what he's going to be sending out. If you want to go ahead and join what he's going to be doing, it's going to be some phenomenal stuff that he'll be doing following up from this. And then keep an eye out for my next month's Zoomcast and Pastor Jeff Turner. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you. Thanks, Jason. Talk to you soon.